Chapter 5. Weston. Dylan's hands gripped and twisted the smooth leather steering wheel as he forced his mind to shift from Sky to the task at hand. There was no place for distracting thoughts when a man prepared for battle. Staying sharp was the key to survival. When the men reached the small path leading to the sick, they parked their vehicles and jumped out, feet pounding the dirt road. Silently, they strapped their weapons to their bodies. There was no need for words. The plan made, it was time for action. Dylan laid his crossbow on his back and looked over his rifle one more time. He planned to be prepared for anything. He and Wade were, in fact, the most outfitted men there. They each carried their bows, 2 guns, knives and a few little surprises Tom didn't know about in case something went awry. "No way we ain't getting back home today." Dylan, Wade, and Tom took point as the group prowled through the forest. Dylan indicated the way to the men fanned out around them. The group moved as quickly and quietly as they were able, though Dylan thought they sounded as loud as a bunch of zoo animals and hoped the Sick's hearing wasn't up to par. Still, he couldn't help exchanging a look and a grimace with Wade after some loud rustling and snaps of branches. When Tom's men reached the little green glen the house stood in, they all stopped as Dylan pointed out the surroundings to Tom. The sheriff signaled the men to spread out along the dense tree line and to stay hidden. Then he stepped out into the opening. Tom's chest heaved with several deep breaths. The sunlight caught on the badge he wore pinned to his sheriff's uniform. He cleared his throat to speak. Before he did, the Sick spotted him. Like yesterday, the Sick meandered through the yard. Those less affected by the disease did chores. All of them stopped when they spotted the sheriff. One of the Sick, confused and angry, lumbered toward Tom. An infected grabbed the Sick's arm to still him as he lowered the garden hoe he'd been using on the vegetables to the ground. He stepped forward, indicating he was the leader. "We're all sick here, but we're not hurting anyone," he said, his manner slow and earnest. "We stick to ourselves." Tom tipped his head in acknowledgement. "My name's Tom. I'm the sheriff of Colton. What's yours?" "Weston." "Well, Weston. I'm sorry to say we need to have a conversation about what's going on up here." Weston frowned and crossed his arms. "Like I said, we aren't hurting anyone, and we stopped the bad ones from roaming. That may be true at the moment, but there are people with kids on this mountain. Their families have kept them away from this disease in the hope they'll survive this. What happens if one of your sick gets away from you? What happens when you're all as ill as they are? Who will stop the roaming then? If those families get this illness, if one of those kids do, it's on you." Weston looked down and shook his head, but he couldn't give an acceptable answer to Tom's question. "We'll move on down the mountain when it comes to that." Tom sighed and rubbed his cheek. "That isn't good enough. There isn't rhythm or reason to this disease. You could all wake up tomorrow more ill than you are now." Weston looked out over his group, then the ground and scuffed his feet before looking back at Tom. "What are you thinking?" Tom pointed toward the road. "I have a truck. I'm hoping you all agree to get inside. There's an area set aside for the sick a couple towns over. We'll take you there." A grumble went out among Weston's more coherent people. "That won't work. Some escaped from there. They say it isn't a good place to be." Weston thought for a moment. "Take us to a deserted town." Tom exchanged a glance with Dylan. "I feel for these people," he murmured, "I really do. It's the first time I've come across any trying to do the right thing." Dylan nodded, his heart weighing heavy as he looked at the sick and infected. Tom turned back to Weston. "I wish that would work, Weston, I really do, but there are pockets of survivors all through these hills. Taking you to a town may help us, but it may kill others. I can't do that. You need to go to the containment area." The crowd's murmur grew louder. Many of the infected began to pace back and forth across the grass, their faces red with anger. The sick picked up on their emotion, and rage started to stir in them. Tom eyed Weston's people and kept his voice calm. "We don't want to upset you, but you know firsthand what this disease is, what it does. You can't want that for others when it can be avoided. See it from our side. Look at the chance we'd be taking if we just walked away." Weston's voice took on a hard edge. "And we won't go to the containment camp. We'll fight before we do that. We'll fight, and you'll die. You'll die right here." Tom shook his head. "I didn't want it to come to this. I didn't come alone. If we fight, it isn't me who will die." Weston was resigned to his fate, and it showed in his next words. "We're dying anyway. You'd be doing us a favor. This disease," he spit on the ground. "It's the most ungodly, revolting thing there is. We're wasting away, and wasting away in that camp would just be more gruesome." Weston sighed. "We only wanted a little time. A little time to live decent, while we could." Tom scanned the group and rubbed his chest. He glanced at Dylan. "This could have been us. It could be Trisha trying to get what little joy life has left for her, counting down the years and minutes." He shook his head, then yelled out to Weston. "We're not just gonna shoot you down. Let's talk this out." Weston barked a bitter laugh. "I lost everything that made this life worth living a long time ago. My wife and my children to this sickness almost the day it started. My farm and house to frighten townspeople thinking they could keep the disease away. Fighting wasn't an option then, wouldn't have helped if I tried. Now you come in here attempting to take this small piece of ground we worked so hard to find. This time, I'm ready. You ain't gonna just shoot us down, I wouldn't let you if you tried. That's the thing about us humans, we fight to the bitter end no matter how bitter it is. No, we're going to make this a party. We might be dying, but we're taking some of you with us." A roar went up among Weston's people. They moved for small weapons hidden around the camp. Dylan shook his head. Tom did all he could to talk them in, and they weren't having it. Dylan watched as the sick and infected cheered themselves on and felt his stomach tighten. Planting his feet, he raised his rifle to his shoulder. This was going exactly as he'd thought it would.